Hey there, it's Jason with the Marketing Podcast Network. Real quick, I want to make sure you know that the world's leading B2B Marketing Expo is returning to the Los Angeles Convention Center on March 21st and 22nd. It's high time we got back together to learn, see the latest technologies and solutions, and network, right? Join thousands of marketing professionals just like you to learn from over 250 industry expert speakers, educational masterclasses, and over 300 exhibitors. And this year, your ticket also gets you into the Sales Innovation Expo and the Marketing and Advertising Expo. So it's like 3 conferences in one. It's March 21st and 22nd at the Los Angeles Convention Center. Go to b2bmarketingexpo.us to register. That's b2bmarketingexpo.us. The Marketing Podcast Network is a proud partner of the B2B Marketing Expo for 2023. We'll see you in LA. Hey, it's Jason Falls of the Marketing Podcast Network. You know we're trying to bring you the greatest education opportunities out there. We've got another one for you, folks. The Creator Economy Expo, CEX 2023, is for content creators and entrepreneurs interested in building and growing their content-first businesses without relying on social platforms. This year's Creator Economy Expo features 10 amazing keynote speakers and over 30 in-depth breakout sessions. Join 500-plus bloggers, podcasters, authors, newsletter writers, speakers, coaches, and consultants, and freelancers at the learning and networking event for content creators. Don't be left out. Plan to attend this year, May 1st through the 3rd, 2023 in Cleveland, Ohio. Register now and get early bird pricing, and the Marketing Podcast Network has a special offer for you. You can get $100 off using the coupon code MPN100. That's MPN100. Head over to CEX.events to register. CEX.events, code MPN100.
Welcome to The Art of Sway. This is a podcast that brings you inside the world of marketing through the lens of influence. I'm your host, Danielle Wiley. Each week, through candid conversations with industry insiders, we will uncover how influencer marketing is making an impact across all consumer buying habits and is changing the way we talk to each other. Let's dive in. I always love talking to Karen Walrond, and our conversation for The Art of Sway was no exception. We go way back. She was one of Sway's very first roster bloggers, and I am so proud of the amazing work she has gone on to do as an author. Karen Walrond is a lawyer, leadership coach, photographer, author, and activist. Her latest book, The Lightmaker's Manifesto, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy, beckons readers towards lives of integrity, advocacy, conviction, and joy. She is a certified Dare to Lead Facilitator, trained in Brené Brown's research on empathy, courage, and vulnerability, and serves on the board of the Houston Coalition Against Hate. Karen and her work have been featured on PBS, Huffington Post, CNN.com, and the Oprah Winfrey Show. She curates the award-winning blog Chickalunks, is the host of The Make Light Show, and is the author and photographer of The Beauty of Different. Karen and her family live in Houston, Texas. Hi, welcome, Karen Walrond. I'm so excited.
It has been way too long. I'm so thrilled to see you.
I know. We had a nice phone conversation. I remember when I was still living in California, I called you. I was doing a really long drive somewhere, and we had a great conversation, so I at least got to hear your lovely voice. But it's been a long time since I've seen it connected to a lovely face talking at the same time.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. I've been diving into your book all week, and I have so many, I kept writing down little jotting notes of little tidbits I want to talk to you about. But we should bring everyone in and set the stage and kind of give a little bit of background, I think, because you've had a very interesting and varied career. We, of course, met through mom blogging.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to think of when we met. It's gotta be.
Well, I knew you, not to be creepy, I knew you before you knew me.
Oh?
As a fan. So you were on, was it Blogging Baby? Had all the blogs on it?
Yeah.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah, I was an editor on Blogging Baby too. That's funny. Gosh, that's going way back.
Well, Blogging Baby is, so I had my blog Food Mommiac, which 3 people read.
I was one of them.
Not yet. Not until this happened. So Melissa Summers had a blog on Blogging Baby.
Wow, yeah.
And I commented something. And back then, if your comment got noticed by someone, that was the key to getting anyone. There weren't that many blogs, and like just getting acknowledged in the comments could be your key. And I went from, I think, like 5 readers a day to 300 or something like that, because she noticed my comment.
Nice. Excellent. That's so funny. Back in the day.
In the old days. But that's one of the things we can maybe, why don't we talk about this first, and then we'll dive into your career, because that will lead into your book. So I'm going to switch up my order.
Yep.
This actually is from your book. So one of the things you said, I'm going to read it to you. Hopefully you don't mind being read your own content back.
No.
So you said, somewhere along the way, as all this growth was happening, bloggers and later YouTubers, Instagrammers, Facebookers, and other social media influencers began writing content solely to please their audiences.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such an eloquent way. I talk a lot about how I remember being at Blog Her in 2006, and they announced that banner ads were going to suddenly be a thing. And there was a giant brouhaha, and it was very controversial that people would want to make money from this thing that they were doing. But we all started our blogs because we love to write, and we wanted somewhere to express ourselves and just share and connect with other people. And I always talk about the difference between then and now, as you know, we started because we wanted to say something, and I think a lot of people start now because it's a career. They're starting it as a career.
Yeah,
but I thought it was so interesting how you pointed out that difference in the kind of that mindset. So when you are doing something to make money, you do have to suddenly be more concerned with what people think of what you're talking about. And it's not just actually a weblog, like a personal journal. You're actually creating something for someone else and have to take their feelings into opinions into account.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I first started, so when did you start your blog? I started in 2004.
I had a live journal one.
Oh, you old school.
Yeah, in 2003, 2004, that grew out of, I was like very huge into eGullet, which was a message board for foodies.
Oh, right.
And then I developed a food blog out of that on LiveJournal. And then after I had my son in 2005, and then I discovered the first mom blog I ever read was Amy Storch.
Oh, gosh.
And then just started like following, reading blog rolls, and like, I swear, I don't know how I got any work done. That's all I would do at work is read blogs.
Those were the days. So so I started
in 2005.
So you started in 2005. I started in 2004. I started a month before my daughter was born.
Okay.
And for sure, the only reason I started it was because we were in the process of adopting. And I thought, I want to do this because my family is in Trinidad and my partner's family is in England. And this cool weblog thing is like a diary. And I knew they were feeling a bit disconnected from the whole process of the adoption. So I'll just write, and I won't put a password on it because, you know, our parents weren't young. And I thought, I will just minimize the complication of being able to see this, right? So that was the only reason I did it. And then, of course, people start reading. And then I had my dreams of grandeur were that I would be the next, like, Irma Bombeck or Dave Barry. Like, it was sort of a way to be a columnist without having a column. But the idea, even that was not about making money. It was sort of about, I'm going to tell stories and people will like to listen to my stories. And I mean, I guess there's an element of that is, I want people to like what I'm writing, but it was very different. And as soon as money tarnished it became a whole other thing, for sure.
I mean, the money, listen, I have the career I have.
Sure.
I'm not going to disparage the money, but if I listen to my heart and think about, like, I actually just discovered, I was telling Rebecca Wolf when I talked to her, I just discovered that Brenda Ponet is still blogging at Secret Agent Josephine.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
And I just sat there for an hour and a half, like, reading through, like, just going that, like, previous, like, I was just drinking it up. I mean, it was like catching up with friends, and it was what I did every morning. And I, would check to see which one was updated. Yeah. So, like, certainly, and I do agree that money is what kind of made that all.
Yeah.
I mean there's other things too, but.
Yeah, for sure. But, even like right now, I was talking to another old school blogger that you and I both know, Asha Dornfest, who is a dear friend, speaking of good things that blogging world has brought to us. And she is really, she's always sort of been on the cutting edge of what's the next thing. And she is like newsletters are where it's at, like that, and
yeah, she has that Substack now,
which is
right?
fantastic. And I think, there is something about the newsletter that does feel like the old school blog, I think, in a lot of ways. What's missing for me anyway is the blog rolls and the like, seeing who comments and going and, oh, that person commented, let's click on theirs and see what their blog is about. Like, it doesn't have the community
that we built.
Yeah, for sure. Do we sound like, get off my lawn? Like,
Karen, increasingly with these episodes, it's like turning into this, like, well, back in the old days.
For sure. Not that the new days aren't wonderful. You kids are doing amazing things.
Well, I can go on and on about how Gen Z is going to save us all, but yeah.
For sure.
So, okay, let's take a step back because I want to talk about your book. There's a lot to go through, but I would love for you to take us through the journey of engineer to attorney to photographer, author.
How long are these episodes? All right. Okay. So I started my adult career, I guess, working career as an engineer. I went I have a civil engineering degree from Texas A&M. So I graduated, did that for a year and realized that was not my thing. But at the time, so I knew I was going to go to grad school. I was like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I knew I wasn't going to get a graduate degree in engineering because that just felt like more of the same. And so I thought, well, the only thing that my engineering degree qualifies me for as far as graduate school is either an MBA or law. And many engineering friends I had were big MBA students. Like, that was their thing. So I thought, just to be different, I'd go to law school, especially because LA Law was on television back then, and they all
LA Law is why I call my husband Mickey. His name is Michael. And when I met him, I was like, I am so glad your name is Michael because I've been looking for someone to call Mickey. Like Susan Day calls Harry Hamlin.
Oh, bless Harry Hamlin. Look, there we go. Being nostalgic again. So yes, that was why I was like, clearly being a lawyer is this very, very high powered, sexy thing. That's what I want. And so went to law school for that reason. And that is not a good reason to go to law school, but that is why I went to law school. Surprisingly loved it. Like, loved law school, loved practicing law, and did for many years. And then got to the point where I was exhausted. By then I was a mom, and I had started blogging because my daughter was about to be born. So I decided that I was going to quit practicing law, which was a bit of a crazy thing to do. It was a crazy thing to do, but it was time. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's not going to be this. And by then I had been such an avid blogger, specifically photo blogger as well. I had sort of really honed my photography skills. I thought, well, I'm just going to see where this takes me. Like, the fact that I write a lot, and by then my blog had a pretty sizable audience for that time. And I was feeling pretty confident about my photography skills. Like, I knew they were solid. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to experiment and see what happens by doing these things, and sort of doing these things with a certain focus. And what happened was that it changed my life. I ended up writing books and traveling around the world as a photographer, and really sort of everything that I do now came because of either something I learned as a blogger or a relationship that I made as a blogger, for sure.
Same.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, I think it impacted so many of us. So your book is The Lightmaker's Manifesto, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy. And it's actually beautiful. It's been on my desk all week, which has been lovely.
Thank you. I love it.
Rubbing, it's so shiny.
It's so shiny. I love to sort of like flash it with the light.
Yeah.
You know, I would love to say I had anything to do with the cover design. I don't, but they did a good job.
Wonderful job. So, I mean, the premise, I'm going to try to summarize it, and you can jump in and correct me. There's so much heavy in the world, and when you're trying to make change, it's because there's something that needs changing, which can be very heavy and difficult. And I'm guessing you would agree, it holds a lot of people back from becoming activists in whatever way they might be able to. And this is kind of the first part of the book is kind of the manifesto about making light and keeping your joy. And then the second part is a manual, a workbook that you can work through to kind of figure out, because you came to this decision, your decision on what you were going to do next came out of journaling. And so you kind of help the reader through that whole process, which can also feel daunting. So before we get into I keep saying before we get into, we will eventually. But I want to talk a little bit. I loved your clarification on the difference between happiness and joy. And I think that's a really important understanding to have. It's very difficult to figure out how to keep your joy while making change if you don't understand that difference between happiness and joy.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to step back a little bit to say that this book was not my idea, right? Like I would love to say that I had this muse in me that was just dying to get this book out, and it wasn't. Again, because of blogging, a publisher found me and found my writing, and they approached me and they said, we have an idea for a book, and it's about the intersection of joy and activism, and I think you could write it. And I was in a place in my life where I was saying yes to whatever good things came my way. And so I said yes, and then literally hung up the phone and thought, I have no idea how to do this. Like, I'm not an activist, and there is no way to do activism with joy. Like, I literally had no clue how I was going to write this book. And so decided to actually interview, as you know, in the book, I interview a lot of people who are activists. And the book is actually really sort of an exploration on how it's possible to do that for me. Like, it was a personal kind of, this is what I learned. And I think it's really important to make that distinction because, as you said, we don't get into activism because we're happy, right? We don't get into activism because things are great. We're either angry or heartbroken or something needs to change or there's a cause that we really want people to know about. And so the distinction really is rooted in something I learned through a book that it's called The Book of Joy, and it's written by the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu.
Oh, those guys?
Who've done a little bit of activism in their lives. But one of the things I think it was Bishop Tutu says is that joy is deeper than happiness. Happiness can be very fleeting, right? Happiness is, somebody got your latte art right, or you got a bonus at work or something like that's happiness. But joy subsumes happiness is really the way that he said it. And that it can often even come be alongside or arise from pain. And the description or the example that he uses is about when a woman gives birth, about how when a woman goes through this excruciating pain and then when the baby's born, then suddenly all she feels is happiness, even though seconds before she was in this sort of excruciating pain. So that's one thing. And another, then Viktor Frankl, who wrote an amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning, talks also about how joy can be very tied to meaning and purpose. And so when you start to see that joy can arise from difficulty, joy is attached to meaning and purpose, it now becomes almost inevitable that you can find joy in activism. And so that's really, really important to understand that I'm not just talking about sort of a feel-good thing. It does feel good, joy does, but often it's something that you see in hindsight. And it's because you've had this meaning and purpose and these moments of really transcendence that have happened in your past that you can look back and go, okay, that was really joyful.
And actually, I listen to Armchair Expert, and Dax Shepard talks all the time about how being in Alcoholics Anonymous, like one of the biggest lessons when someone is struggling is go find someone to help, go find someone to do something. For. And I kept thinking about that as I was reading that section of the book, because it can really get you out of yourself and give you this fullness that it would be very hard to come upon artificially.
Sure. And I think we're wired for it, honestly. I had somebody ask me a question about, must we be activists, right? Like, is that something that has to happen? And my answer is yes, in a lot of ways, not because of the responsibility to do good, which, I mean, certainly there is, but I think also we're just wired to do it. I think we're wired to be of service. The question is how we do that. But I think that's what we're here to do, is to figure out how we can use these gifts that we have, which we all have, and how can we help make, if not the world better, our worlds better by using those gifts, for sure.
So you said when they first came to you, you said yes, because you were saying yes to great things, but then you said, I'm not an activist. Myself.
Of course not. Yeah.
But I know you eventually came to realize that you actually are.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it was so funny. So the reason that the publisher had found me was she had found an essay I had contributed to a book and then looked me up and then signed up to be updated whenever I updated my blog. And so she had kind of gotten a feel of, that I'd written a lot about joy and a lot about gratitude. Like, that's sort of been my shtick, really, ever since I started writing even the blog. And I had done activisty things, right? Like, I had done things like, I participated with the ACLU on a pride parade and photographed it and kind of shared that on the line. And I had done things for Habitat for Humanity and shared that online. And I'd certainly done the Women's March a couple of times and done that. And I traveled to Africa with NGOs and done, I'd done things, but I had never really put them in my mind as I mean, I think I would have said that they were probably activist-y related, but I was not an activist.
Did you feel like you had to have been the one to instigate sounds negative, but like that you had to start the Pride Parade or conceive of the trip to Africa versus just going?
It wasn't even that. It was, in my mind, and I think this is probably true of a lot of people, I thought that activism meant that I had to be at some risk. Like, it couldn't be something that was just fun. Like, it couldn't be that, oh, I went to the Pride Parade and this is amazing, right? And this was really fun. Or I went to Africa and this was really fun. It had to be that I was tear gassed or arrested or had police dogs set on me or stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square. Like, I had to have some sort of personal bodily risk to consider myself an activist. That's what I was thinking in my mind. What ended up happening is I thought, okay, well, fine, I'll write this book. I had written a book in the past before and interviewed a lot of people in that book. And so I thought, well, I love interviewing people, so surely I know activists. I'll find activists to interview. And so I made a list, and the first person that came to mind was my friend Brené Brown, because, Brené has done a lot of stuff on shame and vulnerability and courage, but she is also very vocal about Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ rights, and she's done a lot of stuff. So I was like, okay, she's an activist, and I put that down. And then the second person came to mind is another friend of mine, Tarana Burke, who founded the Me Too movement. And I was like, okay, clearly she's an activist. I'm going to put her down. And I came up with these names, and then I realized that all of the names I came up with, even if at some point in their lives they did find themselves in some sort of physical peril, that's not what they're known for, right? Like, you don't know these people because they are constantly getting arrested or tear gassed or having police dogs. So it suddenly dawned on me, why is it okay for me to call these people activists, but it's not okay for me to call myself an activist? And so that was really the crux of what I wanted to figure out as I did this. Like, why? What is it? So for me, I defined activism, or even light making, which I think is another level of activism that I'll explain, is sort of using your gifts to purposeful action in the hopes of making the world better for others. So using your gifts in purposeful action in the hope of making the world better for others or brighter for others. The difference that I would say from just sort of activism and light making, or why I would call light making sort of a subset of activism, is that using your gifts in a way that also brings you joy. So not only are you making the world brighter for other people, but you're doing it in a way that is sustainable. Because I think a lot of people go into activism and it feels like a chore, or they feel like, I have to do this, so it's going to be a chore, and then that's not sustainable, right? But when you start to do things like, for me, when using my camera to go to Africa to sort of share what's going on, or even like the Pride Parade, and sort of showing the joy and everything, and using it in a way to connect people to the cause, that brings me a lot of joy. Like, it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like a chore. It's actually, yes, please put me in the middle of this. I want to be a part of that. And I think that's what light making is about. And that's really sort of the secret sauce into how you do activism in a sustainable way.
So I kept writing down, just like I said, all these words. So one of the other things that you haven't touched on yet that I wanted to make sure we talked about was this difference of authenticity versus integrity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is so juicy, because as I said, I spend a lot of time thinking about the difference in social media then versus now. And this word authentic comes up. I mean, it's like the most overused buzzword in all of influencer marketing.
Yeah.
So it's just a word I'm talking and thinking about a lot, but it was very interesting to me to see that authenticity versus integrity.
Yeah.
I mean, your point was that it's less about being authentic and more about having integrity, and it kind of all follows, right? If you act with integrity.
I think that's true. I think, it's the whole thing about authenticity, back when we were first vlogging, right? Like, I don't know that anybody really thought about authenticity when we first started writing. We were just writing, right? Like, we were just writing, and it sort of, as a byproduct, people read was authentic. But because of that authenticity, because of that people were sort of just writing what was happening in their lives, or what they were wrestling with their lives, and people started reading it, then of course all these marketers are like, oh, it's the authenticity that people are responding to. We want to hire authentic people. And it's really hard to be authentic when you're marketing yourself to be a product, or to be used to sell a product. Like, it's just a really hard thing to do. And I don't I want to be clear that I'm not knocking people who do this, right? Like, I think that there is definitely a viable way to make money doing this. And I think the people who do it well, as a consumer, it's a much more enjoyable way to be sold something, honestly.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, I don't think it's any kind of insult to the industry as a whole, because the people who are making a lot of money at it and who are successful have integrity, are not talking about things that they're not already passionate about. Right. As a result, the authenticity shines through. It's more interesting to the people who are reading it, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. And
absolutely.
Everyone is pleased all down the line, from the person paying the money to the person sharing the content to the person consuming the content.
Absolutely. So that's one thing, is sort of like, I authentically love this Swiffer, right? Doesn't make sense unless that's something about the Swiffer, something that you've been talking about all along, right? So that's one part. But then the other part of authenticity, which I think is really interesting, and it's especially interesting with this new social media platform, Be Real, which I just got on.
Do you love keeping up with your daughter on it? That's my favorite thing. Is
right? That's the thing, right? Because that's the thing. It's like, I was afraid to get on it, but she was like, no, you should get on it. And I'm like, oh, great. And so Be Real is fantastic. Just so you know, for everybody out there who has a kid that's about to go to college, it's perfect for proof of life, right?
My second is a senior in high school. And last week there were 2 Be Real pings during the school day. Both days in a row, that kid was in class watching football film.
So you could catch it. So there's something very, very interesting about that. Back to the authenticity thing, Be Real is so new, so I don't know how it's going to play out. But there's something about authenticity that some people interpret as an invitation to overshare, or to share way more than maybe those of us who see what they're doing have earned the right to know about. And it can be anything from nudity to sharing about an intimate conversation you had with somebody, right. Or so, or you're struggling in your marriage, and people are like, well, I'm struggling in my marriage, and so I'm being real and sharing it with people. But there's a part of it that's like, you know what, I haven't earned the right to know about that. And there's nothing wrong with keeping private things private, right? Like, privacy is not a ding against authenticity. And I think that that's a really interesting sort of frisson that I think people have been rubbing up against for years now, right? It's like, how much of authenticity is sharing and how much of it is just being in integrity and going, you know what, some things are just private, or some things are just, the world hasn't earned the right to know about that yet.
Right.
And it's not that I'm being duplicitous, or it's not that I'm being cagey. It's just that this is the line and this is where I'm boundaried. And I think that's a really important thing for people to sort of understand. And that's where the integrity thing comes in, is sort of understanding where the line is for what you share, and always being truthful, certainly, but also being able to feel really comfortable with what you're sharing and what you're not sharing, for sure.
Well, and I think it's so important too, like, if you are that light maker and what you've decided to do is shine a light on what's going on and help be a voice for something that needs a voice, it's so important to understand what your boundaries are, what's okay to share and what not to share, and how to do it in a way that feels comfortable for everyone.
For sure. And also understanding sort of what your role is, right? Because I think that's another thing that, especially when it comes to activism and light making, one of the tripwires that you can fall on when you're doing this is sort of the virtue signaling, right? Like, sort of saying, this is my cause, and aren't I amazing for being part of it? Like, really understanding that amplifying a cause and also taking your own ego out of it is a really tough thing to figure out how to do, right? On one hand, you have a platform and that allows you to amplify a cause, and that is a gift that you have that, and it's not about your own worthiness or your own specialness. It's about how do you use that in service. And I think that's something that, like I said, it can be a little bit of a tripwire figuring out how to do that.
It's probably especially hard for people who are sharing, who have a career sharing,
sure,
right? To pull yourself out of it for once, when it's all about you all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough. It's a tough thing to do. I mean, I've certainly struggled with it myself. Like, there's no question that when I write a post or have shared a story that's really not about me, but it's about the story, is really figuring out, how do I do this in a way that does service and honors the story and keeps me out of it? Like, it isn't about me, right? Like, and that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah. Well, this has been so amazing. And I haven't dove into the manual part yet. I've been saving that juicy bit. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy it.
So one of the questions that we ask on the podcast is we've been asking everyone what their favorite commercial was as a child, because growing up for me in the 70s and 80s, that was my form of influence. Was television. So
there were some good ones, right? Especially the 80s were like really, really good. So my favorite, I knew this was coming. And so I immediately thought of the 7-Up guy. Do you remember the 7-Up guy? Never had it, never will. Never had it, never will. Do you remember that?
I don't remember the 7-Up guy, but I remember the Uncola. I remember the words you're saying.
Yeah. So the Uncola, which was about 7-Up. And I don't even know what it never had or never will. I'm like, I don't even remember what it was.
Color?
I maybe, I'm guessing. I don't know. But the guy who did that, he was this wonderfully, very elegant black man dressed in all white. And he had like a fedora. His name is Jeffrey Holder. He is from my country. He's from Trinidad.
Oh.
And so it was always so wonderful to hear a good Trinidadian voice. And also he looked like my family. And he goes, the Uncola, ha ha ha, never had it, never will. And
now
I never had it, never will, right? I was literally thinking that that's clearly my favorite commercial. And I have no idea what 7-Up never had or never will. I cannot, I have to go look it up. I don't remember.
This podcast does not have a fact check. So you folks will have to Google it on your own to figure that out.
Yes. So may he rest in peace. Jeffrey Holder, he's passed since then, but he was amazing.
I love it. I love it. And then if you can tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah. So, well, Be Real apparently, but you can find me. So my blog name was years ago. It's stuck. It's called Chookoolunks. Once you can spell it, you can say it, but CHOOKOOLONKS. But if that's too tough, KarenWalrond.com will get you there. And all of my socials are there on the site.
Well, and we'll link everything on the episode page on our site.
Thank you so
we
much.
Will help out as much as we can. But it was so good to catch up. I've told you before that I need you to record some bedtime stories. For me, it's like nighttime medic. Your voice is so relaxing to me.
Thank you. Well, you can also get the Lightmakers in audiobook, and I did narrate it. So it's such a pleasure. It's been so long, and more's the pity. I really, it's so good to connect with you again.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please check back next Monday for a new episode featuring marketing conversations through the lens of influence. I am your host, Danielle Wiley, and this is The Art of Sway.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Jamie Lieberman hosts a great podcast called the Unbusiness Podcast. Jamie, tell us what these fine folks will get when they listen.
The Unbusiness Podcast provides interviews with real-life entrepreneurs to talk about their struggles, their strategies, and how they have had success and what they've done in the face of failure. It is a real-life look at what it means to own your own business and gives you real takeaways on how you can make yours better.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Go to #legal.com/podcasts. Find the show at marketingpodcasts.net or search for the Unbusiness Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.